wanted to think about mobility and how we stay mobilized through our bodies, in our joints, in our fascia, all of that stuff. It's important. So how do we achieve that? And we achieve that through sort of small circular movements. So we're going to have a look at that today. Creating space in the body is such an important daily practice that we keep restoring space into the body, restoring that slide and glide to the tissues, because that stays with us. That stays with us for life. And I just want to take a nod towards that as my nan left us last night at 96. She would have been 97 in December. And 2 days ago, she was up and dancing because she never stopped moving, even though she did have the dementia. So those bits, not so great. But it's always interesting to me that, you know, she would say that she'd forgotten her stick, and I would ask her if I needed to go back and get the stick, and she'd go, "Nah, don't worry about it." So that's kind of what I wanted to look at today. How do we stay mobile? How do we retain that space? How do we retain that slide and glide to the tissues? And how does that serve us? How does that serve us going forwards? We are all subject to the aging process. So we do have drops in collagen, and the tissues do get stiffer over time. Of course they do. But there's so much that we can do to retain that slide and glide, to keep that moving. And what's really important, I wanted to touch on that briefly, is hydration. And when we're putting water into the body, what's really important is that if the tissues, if the fascia is tight, if it's restricted, if it's stiff and it's sticky, I believe, that it's a little bit like the wrung out flannel that we've left on the side of the bath. And if we leave that flannel in its coil and put it under the water just runs over the surface. But if we unwind the wrung out flannel a little bit and then put it under the water, it's then got the potential to absorb that water, and it doesn't just pass straight through us when it comes to a tissue thing. So creating space in the body and creating an unwinding to the tissues. Vanda talked a lot about unwinding the tissues, because we are built in spirals. So when we come down to ground and we allow ourselves to be in gravity, then we can start to unwind those spirals a little bit like the wrung out flannel. And then when we put hydration into the system, it's then absorbed by the system, and it gives that springy softness back to the tissues. We want to be permanently sloppy is probably the way forward. Fascia looks a lot like egg whites, uncooked egg whites, and we know what that sort of looks like in the bowl. So that's kind of the quality of the tissues that we're looking for, and that takes huge amounts of fluid, but it also takes movement within gravity, and we are designed to do it. So let's get into that today. So we'll just start, as we usually do, which nobody seems to mind, just by laying with the knees bent and the soles of the feet into the ground. And just letting the back of the pelvis just broaden and soften, let the feet stretch. And as we pull the feet down into the ground, just one side and the other, and just feeling that we can just walk out through the low spine. We can get nice length to the low spine just by pulling one foot into the ground and then the other foot into the ground. You find that the hips will roll a little bit from one side to the other. And as we just allow space to happen in the low spine, can we just allow the front of the chest, the ribs just to sink back towards the spine. And the arms just to sink back through the sockets. We want to reconnect the arms and the legs to the spine because they create space in the spine. So if we've got the arms up over our body, just letting the long arm bones just rotate and drop back. Gives us a broadness to the back of the chest. We can stretch the palms just like we stretch the soles of the feet. There's pandiculation in here, which is a great big long word for basic yawning and stretching. But it's interesting because if you stretch your hands and your feet at the same time, it might be that you feel that the breath is naturally drawn into the body. A yawn might even come along there, but we're just going to, with that stretchy palms, just letting the stretchy palms just go up towards the top of your mat. Space into the underarm, so as much space in the palm is reflected through space in the underarm, space in the side of the ribs, space in the side of the waist. And just noticing how that just keeps creating space into areas where we might find we've got a bit of tension. The arms can come out, down and round in a nice circle back towards the hips. And then we just start the process again. So again, that lovely long feet. Drawbridge of the sacrum rolling away. Broad palms. Long arm bones can drop back through the sockets. And we've got space. Space between each individual rib. Let the tummy soften back towards the spine. It's in that softening back we start to mobilize the muscles on the inside of the low spine. And just noticing as the breath comes in where it runs into resistance. Can we relax the tissues between the shoulder blades? Can we relax the tissues down each side of the low spine? Maybe across the back of the pelvis. So we just let the pointy parts of the elbows just drop to the side, to the sides of the body. Heavy forearm, heavy hands. See if the jaw just needs to drop back into the back of the head along with the eyes and the tongue. And create space in the neck. And the feet just get pulled down into the ground so we can feel the long little toe side, big toe joint, and the inner side of the heel, and just coming through that lovely rotation, let the knees come out to the sides. But we're drawing the legs through the hips into the deep waist. So the low spine is supported as we come into our twist. Maybe a hand around the ribs somewhere to support the ribs. We want the front of the ribs just sinking back to the spine, finding the underarms. coming up through the spine into the back of the head. And the head just goes in the opposite direction to the knees. It's a little bit like our cat pose. We want to be walking up the inside of the spine. And just reversing the process to come back to the center. And can we leave any ideas at the door about what our twist is going to look or feel like, or where resistances may be in the body, particularly those of us that have got interventions and scar tissues and that sort of stuff. Can we leave that at the door? It is a practice, not perfect, but rather than looking for or expecting restrictions, can we just allow movement to happen without expectation or prejudging? We judge a lot and we expect a lot based on our previous experience, but can we just temporarily forget that and just move, just allow the body to move itself? Are we holding the head? Are we holding the back of the pelvis? Are we holding the low spine? Noticing where we're holding tension. Are we actually holding on, disconnecting ourselves from the floor? It's interesting, in an attempt to twist, we might find that one of the glutes has been activated, or we might find that one of the shoulders is coming up around the ear, or we might find that the jaw is getting involved. There's such subtle things, but they're worth the attention. They're not wrong, but just to notice, can we let go at the grip of the hip? And just let the bones rest in the hammocks of the fascia and let everything rest into gravity. It's interesting, I'm sitting a cat and a dog at the moment, and they roll over with effortless effort because they just sink into the ground and the limbs just flop over the top of them. So can we be a little bit more like that? But they're lucky because they're missing the prefrontal cortex, so they don't have the ability to notice these things. But equally, they don't have the ability to get caught up in them either. We're so caught up in the doing. And actually, can we just feel the edges of the feet pulled down into the ground and the edges of the hip pulled down into the ground and the edges of the ribs pulled down into the ground, and just notice where gravity takes us down, and everything else will sort itself out. So just finishing up on this final side. And we'll just let the knees come in towards you. And again, just feeling that broadness on the back of the pelvis, the smile through the back of the ribs. We can just let the hands rest around the shins somewhere, or around the front of the knees if the knees don't come so close in towards you. But it's just to let the weight of the hands into the shins just draw the legs in towards you, and let the weight of the sacrum roll away. So we've got that lovely drawbridge of the sacrum. So we're moving in the two directions at once. And this takes you deeply into the underside of the ribs again. Letting the long arm bones come back through their sockets. To just broaden the chest. And we're just going to make a nice circle with the right knee. Leave the back of the hips in the ground. We're just looking at that long leg bone, just stirring the porridge. In the bowl of the hip. So that we feel that the long leg bone can just drop back into the socket. And when it does that, when it starts to drop back through the hip into the ground, there's an opening that starts to happen at the back of the knee. And the heel starts to get pulled away towards the sky. And it's just noticing that there is a, the ball and socket joint is on the side of the hip. It's not on the front, so you might find it's not a linear. It's not a linear movement. It's a sporadic movement as the leg starts to open up towards the ceiling. Can we leave the leg connected into the deep waist, into the underside of the rib? So we get a length between the hip and the ribs. The sit bone starts to go away towards the end of your mat. It's challenging a little bit for hamstrings. Because again, we're disconnecting the sit bone from the back of the leg. And you can leave the left knee in towards you or have it on the floor, whichever feels more supported for you. But again, we're looking to find space in the hip. So we want space between the hip, between the socket and also the ball. It tends to get a little bit close coupled, and usually because the front of the tummy is switching off. So when we let the long leg bone go back into the socket, and we can change over sides if you haven't already, we let the long leg bone go back through and reconnect to the waist. That stirring of the femur bone in the porridge of the hip starts to create a space at the front of the hip. So that crease, that's the word I was thinking of, that crease at the front of the hip, the crease at the top of the leg, there's a spaciousness there. You can pop a finger in there if it's good, just to reaffirm that to the body, that that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the sit bone to go away and the leg to go up. And you feel that in the side of the waist and the side of the tummy initially. It's a tricky one because we get very enamored with the leg, and we also get very, very taken with tight bits in and around the hip and the desire to stretch things out as always. But can we just drop back into the stillness of the body? And the back of the knee starts to open up and the foot gets pulled up. The more we come up through the waist, you might find that the arm gets involved as well. So the more the heel pulls the back of the knee open and the more the sit bone goes away and creates space in the long side of the ribs into the underside of the arm, then we might find that the arm starts to float as well. Something that looks like the beginning parts of baby pose for those of us that have been to normal yoga classes. And one side might be a little easier than the other, and we can just play with both. We'll just let the legs and the arms just fold in and come back down to ground. And as the feet reconnect with the floor, just noticing if they feel any different. We're just going to sink the left heel into the ground. Again, give the knee a little wave. We've created space at the front of the hip, so it should just sink back quite easily. We can just let the heel just get pulled away towards the end of the mat. And can we let that come up through the side of the waist, through the ribs, into the underarm, so it's the same arm and the same leg that extend away from each other, pulled out from the connection at the ribs, so two different directions from the diaphragm. Leave the arm in the socket, because when we need to come back to center, we want the arm connected to the solar plexus in order to roll everything back in, and we can come out through the other side. So again, just that heavy, heavy heel, heavy front of the ankle, heavy back at the knee, space at the front of the hip. And then we can just drop through the solar plexus and come back to centre. So we just have one more on each side. Noticing that broadness at the collarbones and a broadness at the hips. And it's the softening back at the tummy that provides the strength for our movement. Extending out from solar plexus. Hello. You found me. And we're coming back to the centre. We're going to give the knees a nice hug. I'm going to come over onto whichever side is comfortable for you, finding your way up to square pose. So hands underneath the shoulders. No. I know. Got my trusty fluffy assistant here with me today. Yeah. Come on then. So if you've got a trusty fluffy assistant that's getting in the way, I can see a few. Then we want the we want the hands underneath the shoulders. Ah. And we want the knees underneath the hips. Go and get your toy. Where's your bed? Come on. And just letting the tops of the feet sink into the ground. And just finding the big toes can get pulled away towards the wall behind you. And the front of the ankles get pulled down into the ground. And again, we've just got that space at the crease on the front of the hip between the top of the leg and the front of the tummy. So as we find that, again, the toes can start to tuck under just on one side. So as the toes get pulled down into the ground and the knee starts to leave the floor, because the heel is going back towards the wall behind you. It's the same type of movement as we were doing when we were laying on our back. We're just letting the heel be drawn away. And we come up through the hip into the side of the waist, into the underside of the ribs. noticing the response in the pelvis and the back of the ribs and the back of the head. And when we come back in, we can come through on the other side if you haven't already. But it's just noticing, can we stay in that centre line? Can we stay in that midline? If we draw a chalky line down, right down the centre of our body, between the eyes, down the centre of the chest and all the way down to the pubic bone, then can we stay in that centre line? It requires quite a deep pull from both sides of the body so we don't start throwing the body weight from one side or the other. And again, we're looking at that limb integration into the deep waist, the arms that wrap around the chest. One side may be easier than the other. And if it feels good, when we've got the pull down through the both feet, yes, the legs are in a different arrangement, well, when we've got the pull down through both feet, then we find that the opposite hand might become lighter on the floor, but it extends out from the solar plexus again, through the side of the ribs, through the underarm, into the index finger. And it's like somebody's got hold of our hand, they're pulling the arm out from the side of the ribs, from the tummy. And pulling the leg that comes out from the hip, the side of the waist, and the underside of the ribs. So we're not disconnecting the limbs out of their sockets. And it may be that, the leg comes off the floor or not come off the floor. It might be that the arm doesn't come up as high as we're used to, depending on how much give we've got in the sternal fascia. So the next time we're coming back down, and if you're halfway through your movement, just take your time. There's always time. We're just taking the sit bones back, just towards our child pose. But we leave the hands pulled down into the ground. We want to just feel that the more the hands get pulled down into the ground, the more they wrap around the rib. Can we stay with the space in the ribs between the shoulder blades? Maybe a little bit lower than the shoulder blades. But the interesting thing when we've got the hands out in front and the sit bones going back is a lot of time we pull straight into the low spine. And actually we don't want to load the low spine and the pelvis. So can we keep the arms connected to the ribs between the shoulder blades? Can we keep the head connected to the heart and behind the heart and the lungs? So when the sit bones draw away, it's going back down and into the legs. When the low spine draws away, it's because it's supported by the legs underneath. because your low spine is supported by your legs and forms an integrative, is half half your body is covered by your legs. So as the shins pull down into the ground, that comes up through the inside of the pelvis and blends onto the front of the low spine. So coming into our child pose in this way is a leggy movement, and it's not subject to being pulled around by the arms at the front of the body. And then we start to get the spine spaces itself rather than us installing a stretch, if you like. So as we find this connection through arms and legs and the support for the inside of the spine, if we pull the shins down into the ground, we pull the feet down into the ground, we start to come back somewhere to center, but we might find that there's a dog pose in here somewhere, because the lift through the ribs and the lift through the pelvis will just keep taking us upwards if that's what we choose. We can just keep that leg and arm connection to the spine. And just the pull down into the floor, which will take us in a direction of something. So it may be that you just come back to your square pose and work with the spine, or it may be that you can find your dog pose here. And again, can we just let that happen without preconceived ideas of where we're going? The heavy, heavy heel taking the leg out of the side of the waist and back. Just like we were doing in our movement previously, we've still got legs that are connected to the sides of the waist and arms that go through the sockets into the ribs. So the next time we come down, just if it's nice to have your hands on the sofa in front of you, or you can have them on a chair in front of you, or you can stay down on the floor, whichever feels good. But just letting the toes tuck under on one side, we've got that lovely drawing away, that leg that's connected to the side of the ribs, side of the waist. So can we feel that when we've got this lovely pull of the hands, which just takes the ribs out of the way, we've got a leg that can just start to step through. And it's nice, you know, if we've got the hands elevated, if we're here, same thing, we've still got those arms wrapping around the back of the ribs, and the foot can come through. And again, it's staying away from those preconceived ideas if we can, noticing what happens if we've got shoulders that come up round the ears or the jaw gets involved. Can we leave the work in the centre of the body? And depending on where you are in your journey, feet and shin get pulled down into the ground, and we can just, back of the pelvis comes forwards, and we might start to come up. But again, looking at those, how do we move in gravity? That back foot that pulls down and the front foot that pulls down, bringing the pelvis back into the centre line, back into the gravity line. And if we keep pulling down, then we've got that natural upward lift that happens through the centre of the body and brings us back into the underside of the ribs. Maybe the arms come in as well. And make sure you've got enough padding underneath you. So you might find that you've got one side that's a little easier than the other, depending on where you are today. And we're just staying with the sit bones, back of the sacrum, underside of the ribs. So we can, at some point, find our way up to standing, taking your time with your movement and just noticing. It's an interesting one because when we come up, and do practice this stuff with your hands in your pockets just to make it look super easy. Getting on and off the floor, it is just a fundamental. And it starts from here. It starts from this square pose and bringing the foot through. We want the leg strength. We want the muscles to be strong enough. We want the bones to be dense enough for us to be able to come up and down with the sit bones high, so that we feel that the work is in the centre of the body. It's hard work. If you do this a few times a day, it'll make you puffed out. So it's worth it. It's something that you can just just put into your day-to-day things. So we've always got that. If we don't use it, we lose it. So if we keep trying it every day, it can be with your hands on something. It doesn't have to be with your hands in your pocket. It's just showing off. So sticky feet. Feet get pulled down into the ground. We stand up because we get pulled down. So we keep the feet, outer edges of the feet, big toe joints in the inner sides of the heels. Just all pulling down into the ground, which just leaves the sit bones disconnected from the back of the leg. It lets the tail lift and keeps space in the front of the hip flexors. And we want that. So that we can pull the feet down into the ground and feel like we're pulling the floor apart underneath us. You'll feel the muscles of the legs engage. And that will take you all the way up into the underside of the ribs. It'll take you all the way up through the inside of the tummy. So when we've got one sticky foot that pulls down into the ground, if we keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling, we can feel the centre line of the body. We stay in it as much as we can, but if we keep pulling, the other foot is going to come off the ground. But what we want to feel is that the foot that's coming off the ground has also got a little bit of stickiness to it. There's a heaviness to it. It's a little bit like, you know, when the washing up, when you pull the hands apart and you get the strands in between. When we pull down and the foot comes up, we've still got that connection to the ground. It's being pulled away from the ground. And this keeps the legs plugged into the deep waist, so that as the foot gets pulled back down, we can feel it in the side of the waist. And the foot connects with the floor, and then we can pull down with the other foot. It gives us space in the ankle, the knee, the hip, and the side of the waist. And then the other foot starts to leave the ground. So we've got that sticky connection of the foot that's leaving the ground. It feels like a weight on it, so we're pulling it away, and the gravity is pulling it back down, and it keeps it into the side of the waist. And then, of course, the foot is happy to go back to the ground because it's heavy. So when we do this, what happens is we've still got that space in the crease on the front of the hip. You can put a finger in there if it feels good. And we feel that we've got connection into the sacrum, into the low spine. And that space in the hip then gives us the freedom to do whatever we would like to do with the leg. So it could go out to the side if we keep our hands around the pelvis. It could go out to the side. It can, if we take the heel, same as we were doing before. If we get hold of that heel, the heel is in its sky hammock, just gets pulled away towards the wall behind you, but it gets pulled out from the side of the waist. There's not much to do with the hip. It's very easy to lift legs off the glute because the glute is a large muscle, but we're not so interested in the glute. What we're interested in is the lengthening away from the front of the tummy and the front of the hip and the front of the quad, the front of the thigh, that happens because the heel is being pulled away from behind you. So we've got a leg that's connected deeply into the underside of the solar plexus, not just hanging out of the socket. Depending on how far along you are with your journey, you might start bolting arms into there at some point as well, because the arms, you know, just as we were doing in the previous movement, as the leg gets pulled out from the waist, it fires the ribs, and then the arm then gets involved. So it becomes a body-wide event, spine side-wide event. So your leg and your arm are blended into each other. You know, the issue that we have is that we think we're balancing on the floor when we're not. We're an integral part of the floor. So the more we get pulled down towards the centre of the earth and the more we connect to gravity and feel that force coming through us, the easier the balance is. Because now we're not wobbling around on a surface anymore. And of course we do wobble around on the surface. But again, the ripples become a body-wide event. It's not just little muscles of the ankle that are trying to stabilize us. It becomes a whole body. And it's hard work. It's good, Diana. Let the arms come back through their sockets. Bring the shoulder blades together on the back of the body and it will help you with the stability you're looking for. Bring the ribs back into the spine. Sarah Jane, it will help. It's good. More pull on the back heel, Lisa. Yeah, you've got the potential. We all do. But we've got, you know, it's an interesting one to play with. When we keep limbs soft and keep limbs soft, but actually when we get that pull underneath the heel that pulls us out of, it pulls the leg out of the waist. When we're beginners, when we start, we tend to, you know, if the heel goes away, we're still locking out through the knee. But when we're a little bit further on, what we find is that when we get that pull on the heel, it goes through the knee, through the hip, and into the side of the waist. We restore that connection there. I hope that makes sense. And it's a great shift when that happens, because it means we're not locking out through intermediary joints. We're going back to the central core system, and it's useful. Yes, it looks much better. And the strength and the stability will come. This is good. So we're going to come down to sitting and make yourself comfortable. Have a cushion behind you, sofa behind you. Stay on the sofa if it's nice. You can go on a chair if it's nice. Just find what is comfortable. And we're just going to take the thumbs and just sink into I should go this way. Just going to take the thumbs, go in behind the ears, and we're finding the bobbly bits at the base of the skull and the top of the neck, and we can just smooth the thumbs in towards the center line of the back of the head. So it's kind of an in and an up movement. You'll feel that it draws the jaw with it. And we get some space to the neck, and the ribs can start to hang down. from the base of the skull, and can we just keep that almost like a Jacob's ladder, that ripple effect that just feels that the spine can just fall away all the way down into the back of the pelvis. It's a little bit like an upright cat pose. Can we touch in with each individual vertebrae all the way down? And the pelvis just hangs. We feel that the hips just start to let go, relax and release in response to the head coming into the gravity line, in response to the front of the chest being pulled back towards the spine, in response to the viscera and the guts of it all being pulled back towards the spine. And when we've got this connection of the other component body parts back into the spine, then we feel that the hip flexors and the muscles around the hips really start to relax and let go, and the sit bones get pulled quite strongly down into the ground. And again, the spine starts to space itself rather than us trying to stretch the spine or lengthen the spine or all of that stuff. Actually, it's all hardwired in there, and it can do it without our intervention. And we just let the hands rest wherever is good. And just let the breath roll in. So like the waves going up the beach that are very free and uninhibited, can we let the breath roll in just like that? And when the breath chooses to leave, can it just be pulled back towards the main body of the sea? And we can just sit in behind the heart and the lungs, that quiet place. And we just give the fingers and toes a wiggle, making some rotations with the wrists and the ankles. And taking the arms up over the head and the legs long for a nice stretch through the body. Bring the knees into the chest. Give your knees a nice hug. Have a little rock from side to side if you're laying. Returning back to sitting in your own time. Just taking a moment to check in with yourself. Notice how your body feels. Good. I hope you found that useful. It's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.